Today we're starting a series called Masterpiece, and it's all about our primary identity as Christ followers. It's that journey that every single one of us goes through to figure out just who we are. Some of us spend a lifetime trying to figure it out on our own. But during this series, we want to help one another root our identity in Christ. So, we're going to spend a lot of time throughout this series in a book of the Bible called Ephesians. Ephesians is actually a letter written to a church in a city called Ephesus. A guy named Paul, who started that church, wrote this letter around 60 AD to instruct and encourage the Christ followers who were there. Since this letter was written to people in a particular city, it's helpful to know a little bit about the culture there. Ephesus was a large, prosperous harbor city that contained one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Temple of Artemis. Life itself for the people who lived in Ephesus was focused around this temple, from commerce to worship to tourism. And the people of Ephesus found a large part of their identity in the Temple of Artemis and the city where they lived. For many, it was their livelihood. But my guess is that the Ephesians were a lot like us, people who are on a journey wondering, who am I? What really defines me? In his letter to the Ephesians, Paul spends a lot of time reminding them the truth about their identity. Do you wrestle with the question, who am I? As a Christ follower, the primary answer is not found in your job or your reputation or your bank account. And you won't discover your true identity by working harder, dressing sharper, or parenting smarter. In fact, there's really nothing that you can do to define the most important thing about you except to embrace it. Because as Christ followers, our primary identity is not built on something that we do, but on something that's already been done. Through Jesus Christ, you have been adopted as God's child. You are a child of God. But what happens sometimes? Well, if we're competing against each other and I see myself as coming out better than you, then I'm filled with pride. And I build a false sense of security in that pride. And this can also fill me with fear because I'm afraid that if I don't maintain that, I'll be seen as second rate immediately. And so this sense of identity forces us to feel desperate to stay ahead. Now, if I compete with you and I end up feeling less than you, then I'm filled with shame. And I walk around with this nagging sense that I'm not enough. So all this pride and fear and shame can actually begin to shape how we view ourselves. We can actually build entire identities around these negative emotions. But when we view ourselves the way God views us, we experience incredible freedom. Being a child of God means that our past is in the past. All the ways that we've messed up and screwed up and failed to measure up, they don't define us anymore. Paul reminds us of this in Ephesians. As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world and the ruler of the kingdom of the air. But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ even when we were dead in our transgressions. All that shame that you've carried, well, you don't have to carry it around anymore. Who you were does not define who you are anymore. You are God's adopted son. You are God's adopted daughter. You are a child of God. And being a child of God also means that my identity is given. It's not earned. All that striving, all that competing, all the ways that we knock each other down just to lift ourselves up, we can let go of that now. We can't take credit for our new identity, which is found in Christ. For it is by grace that you've been saved, through faith. And this, not from yourselves, it's the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. And being a child of God is an identity that is timeless and permanent. Nobody can steal this gift from us. What a gift. In fact, like a priceless work of art that never loses its value with the passing of time, you are God's masterpiece. Have a great small group.